A tall alien with scaled, emerald skin stepped forward, his voice cold and deliberate. Earth must understand its place in the galaxy, he declared, his words transmitted to millions across the stars. Diplomatic insolence will not be tolerated. With a calculated swing, he struck Richards across the face, his claw leaving a fresh gash. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the assembly, not out of sympathy, but admiration for the display of dominance. On Earth, the broadcast sparked instant outrage. Across continents, people stood frozen before screens, their horror turning into fury. In a hidden military bunker beneath the Rockies, General James Anderson leaned over the console, watching the broadcast with a clenched jaw. A man known for his calm under pressure, Anderson radiated fury that unsettled even his hardened staff. "Cut the feed," he barked. The image of Richards's bloodied face disappeared, replaced by a tactical map. Anderson turned to his advisors. "We can't let this stand. We don't negotiate with bullies." "But, sir," an aide interjected hesitantly, "this could escalate into an interstellar war." Anderson's glare silenced the room. "They've already started one. They just don't know it yet." A single name came to his mind: Michael Raven Cross. Far from the polished halls of diplomacy, Raven was an embodiment of Earth's darkest capabilities. The man was a ghost in official records, but a nightmare etched into the memories of those who had faced him. Tattoos covered his muscular frame, each a chilling testament to missions accomplished and lives taken. The ink sprawled across his arms, chest, and back told a story of violence and precision. Dragons, skulls, and symbols from cultures both terrestrial and alien. At that moment, Raven was in the middle of finishing what he did best. In a seedy alien outpost on the outskirts of Earth's influence, he cornered the last member of a cartel trafficking human lives. The alien, a hulking brute with 4 arms, whimpered as Raven closed in. "You're going to tell me where the others are," Raven said, his voice calm yet menacing. The alien, desperate, made the mistake of lunging. A blur of movement later, the creature lay on the floor, a knife embedded in one of its hearts. Raven wiped the blade clean and activated his comm device. Target neutralized. Extraction ready. Instead of the usual acknowledgement from his handler, he heard Anderson's unmistakable voice. "Raven, we've got a situation." Minutes later, Raven stood in Anderson's war room, his imposing presence drawing uneasy glances from the officers present. Anderson wasted no time, showing him the intercepted broadcast of Richards's capture. "They made a mistake," Anderson said, locking eyes with Raven. "I want you to make sure they never forget it." Raven studied the images, his expression unreadable. "You want him back?" "And a message sent," Anderson replied. "The Council thinks they're untouchable. Prove them wrong." Raven didn't ask for details. He never did. What mattered was the mission and the freedom to execute it his way. Anderson handed him a small device. "This contains everything you need: intel, access codes, weapon caches. No backup, no extraction. Just you." Raven took the device without a word and turned to leave. One of the younger officers muttered under his breath, "Sending one man against the Council? He's just human." Raven paused, his voice cutting through the room like a blade. "They'll wish I wasn't." The journey to Zecta Prime was swift and silent. Raven's transport, a modified stealth craft, slipped through the Council's defenses undetected. Alone in the cockpit, he reviewed the mission data. The compound was a fortress, its defenses engineered to repel armies. But armies weren't Raven's style. He thrived in the shadows, where panic was his ally and precision his weapon. As the craft neared the planet, Raven removed his jacket, revealing the full extent of his tattoos. Each design seemed to come alive under the dim light, a tapestry of his violent history. Among them was a fresh mark, a black crescent surrounding a shattered star, his reminder of what was at stake. Touching down on the planet's surface, he activated his cloaking gear and melted into the night. He was no longer human or soldier. He was a predator, and Zecta Prime had become his hunting ground. The mission was clear: get Richards out alive and ensure the Council understood the cost of crossing Earth. The compound loomed ahead, its sharp angles and glowing spires a testament to alien engineering. Raven surveyed the patrols, noting their patterns with practiced ease. He moved with the precision of a surgeon, slipping past sentries and disabling cameras. One guard turned just in time to see him emerge from the shadows. The alien's attempt to call for help was cut short as Raven's blade found its mark. He left the body where it fell, knowing it would be found. The Council needed to feel fear, and fear thrived on discovery. As Raven delved deeper into the compound, he placed small, inconspicuous devices along the way, silent harbingers of chaos to come. In the heart of the compound, Richard sat slumped against the wall of his cell. Despite the pain and exhaustion, his mind remained sharp. He had seen broadcasts from Earth before the Council cut the signal, and he knew his people wouldn't abandon him. Still, hope was a fragile thing in the face of the Council's cruelty. A distant sound reached his ears, a muffled thud followed by a faint hum. He straightened, his instincts telling him that something had changed. For the first time since his capture, the oppressive silence of the compound felt vulnerable. Raven's shadow moved through the corridors, his path marked by the silent elimination of obstacles. Every step brought him closer to Richards, and every body left behind sent a silent message to the Council. Earth's vengeance was coming. The night air on Zector Prime was unnaturally still, the silence broken only by the rhythmic hum of patrol drones circling the Council compound. Michael Raven crouched in the shadows of a jagged outcropping, his sharp eyes tracking the drone's predictable patterns. The compound loomed ahead, its polished, angular architecture glinting under the twin moons. It wasn't just a fortress. It was a statement, a reminder of the Council's untouchable power. Raven smiled coldly to himself. Statements had a way of crumbling under pressure. He activated his cloaking device, a marvel of stolen alien tech that wrapped him in near-perfect invisibility. Moving like a wraith, he darted toward the outer perimeter, timing his movements to the drone rotations. A pair of alien guards, hulking figures with glistening carapaces, stood at a secondary gate, their weapons at ease. They never saw him coming. A flash of steel, a faint gurgle, and both fell silently to the ground. Raven dragged their bodies into the shadows, his movements deliberate, almost ritualistic. He left no trace but a smear of dark blood on the cold metal floor. Inside the compound, the air was cooler, the lighting subdued to accommodate the various species within. Raven's boots made no sound as he moved, each step calculated, each turn of a corner a potential confrontation. His mind was a machine, compartmentalizing every detail. The placement of guards, the locations of surveillance cameras, the faint vibrations of distant footsteps. He wasn't just infiltrating. He was dissecting the compound piece by piece. Ahead, the corridor opened into a monitoring station. For alien operators sat before an array of holographic screens, their attention fixed on the feeds. Raven studied their positions for a moment, noting their lack of weapons and the sluggish way they moved. He acted without hesitation. A thrown blade found its mark in the throat of the nearest operator, silencing him instantly. Before the others could react, Raven was on them, his movements a blur. The room fell silent again, save for the soft hum of the screens. He scanned the feeds, his eyes narrowing as he located Thomas Richards's cell deep within the compound. The diplomat's haggard form was slumped against the wall, his head resting on his knees. 2 guards flanked the entrance to the cell, their postures relaxed, unaware of the storm heading their way. Raven shut down the local surveillance grid, knowing it would take the Council's engineers several minutes to reroute control. Minutes were all he needed. He slipped into the adjoining hallway, now shrouded in darkness. The emergency lighting system cast eerie red glows along the walls, turning the pristine compound into a scene from a nightmare. The guards at Richards's cell barely had time to register the disruption before Raven struck. He emerged from the shadows, his movements fluid and deadly. The first guard fell to a swift, brutal strike to the neck, his alien physiology no match for Raven's precision. The second guard managed a strangled cry before Raven drove a blade into his chest, silencing him for good. The human crouched over the bodies for a moment, ensuring they were truly down before turning his attention to the cell's locking mechanism. Inside, Richards lifted his head at the sound of the door sliding open. For a moment, his swollen eyes struggled to focus. Then recognition dawned. "Raven," he rasped, his voice rough from days of dehydration and pain. Raven stepped inside, his gaze scanning the diplomat's injuries. "You're alive," he said flatly, a statement rather than a question. "Barely," Richards replied, forcing himself to his feet with a wince. "They've been trying to break me. Show the galaxy humans can bleed. They'll learn we can make others bleed more," Raven said, already moving to the door. "Can you walk?" "Not fast." "Then try not to slow me down." The two slipped into the corridor, Raven taking point as they moved deeper into the compound. The alarm sounded moments later, a shrill wail that shattered the oppressive quiet. Richards glanced at Raven, whose expression remained calm, almost detached. "They know we're here," the diplomat said. "They knew the moment they found the bodies," Raven replied, his voice devoid of concern. "This just makes it official." The compound erupted into chaos as alien guards flooded the corridors, their movements frantic as they tried to locate the intruders. Raven led Richards through a series of maintenance tunnels, avoiding the main routes. When they encountered resistance, Raven dispatched it with ruthless efficiency. A pair of insectoid guards met them at a junction, their weapons raised. Raven dropped the first with a well-placed shot from his silenced pistol, then closed the distance to the second in a heartbeat, breaking its neck with a swift twist of his hands. Richard stumbled after him, his breathing labored. "You're enjoying this," he said, half accusation, half observation. "Not the time for therapy," Raven shot back, pulling him forward. As they neared the compound's eastern wing, Raven activated a series of devices he'd planted earlier. Explosions rocked the structure, sending plumes of fire and smoke through the corridors. The compound's power grid faltered, plunging sections into darkness. Panic spread among the guards, their shouted commands drowned out by the sound of collapsing walls and distant screams. In the chaos, Raven and Richards reached the compound's loading bay, a sprawling area filled with supply crates and transport vehicles. Dozens of guards had gathered, forming a makeshift blockade. Raven sized up the situation, his mind racing. "Stay here," he told Richards, handing him a sidearm. "If they get through me, shoot yourself before they take you." "Comforting," Richards muttered, gripping the weapon with trembling hands. Raven stepped into the open, drawing the guards' attention. For a moment, there was silence as the aliens recognized him. Whispers spread like wildfire. "The Butcher," one hissed, its voice tinged with fear. Raven didn't give them time to react. He moved with terrifying speed, his pistols blazing as he advanced. Each shot was precise, each movement deliberate. The guards fell one by one, their superior numbers meaningless against Raven's ferocity. When his weapons ran dry, he discarded them without hesitation, drawing a pair of combat knives. The air filled with the sound of steel meeting flesh, punctuated by the guttural cries of the dying. Richards watched from his hiding place, equal parts horrified and awed. He'd heard stories of Raven, the whispered legends among Earth's military ranks. Seeing the man in action was something else entirely. It wasn't just skill. It was instinct, an almost primal connection to violence that turned the battlefield into Raven's domain. When the last guard fell, Raven stood amid the carnage, his chest rising and falling with controlled breaths. He wiped his blades on a fallen guard's uniform and turned back to Richards. "Time to move." Richards nodded, his legs unsteady as he followed. The alarms continued to blare, but the sounds of pursuit had diminished. The compound was reeling, its defenders scattered and broken. Raven led the way to an awaiting transport, its engines already humming. As they boarded, Richards looked back at the burning compound. "You think they'll come after us?" "They will," Raven said, sealing the hatch. "And when they do, they'll regret it." With a roar, the transport lifted off, leaving the shattered remains of the compound behind. The transport shot through the atmosphere, its engines roaring as it cut through the thick clouds of Zecta Prime. Inside, Raven was still, his eyes fixed on the stars outside the viewport. The chaos of the compound, the bloodshed, the smell of death. It all seemed far away now, but the weight of the mission still pressed heavily on his shoulders. Richard sat across from him, his face pale, every movement slow and deliberate as he fought through the physical toll of his captivity. For a moment, there was only the hum of the engines and the crackle of static over the comms. Raven was the first to break the silence. "You've been quiet since we left." Richards's gaze flickered toward him, but he said nothing at first. His eyes, once sharp with the confidence of a seasoned diplomat, now appeared worn, haunted by the experience. Finally, he spoke, his voice hoarse. "What's next?" Raven leaned back in his seat, his posture relaxed, but his eyes remained sharp. "We regroup. They'll send reinforcements, but it'll take them time. We use that time to strike first." Richards frowned. "Strike at what? We're just 2 men." "We're 2 men the Council never thought would be a threat," Raven interrupted, his tone cutting through the uncertainty. "That's our advantage." Richards nodded, but there was a hint of skepticism in his eyes. He had always been a man of diplomacy, a negotiator who believed in words over weapons. But the truth was undeniable. The Council didn't respect humanity. They saw humans as expendable, and that perception had to change. He glanced at the bleeding gash along Raven's arm, the dried blood mixing with the grime of battle. "You should have let me help." Raven glanced at the wound, but his expression remained unchanged. "I don't need help. I just need you alive. You make it sound like you're protecting me." Raven met his gaze, his eyes hard and unwavering. "You're the key to everything. Don't mistake that for weakness." The silence between them deepened. They had a shared history, though it was one built on the battlefield, not the negotiating table. Richards had been a diplomat, yes, but his time in the field, his time with the Special Forces, had given him a different edge. It was something Raven knew, something he had relied on in this mission. They both understood that diplomacy had its limits when confronted with an empire that didn't respect life. The transport jostled slightly as it hit a turbulence patch, but Raven's eyes remained locked ahead, unblinking. He wasn't just thinking about the next step in their mission. He was planning something much bigger. The Council had made a mistake by underestimating humanity, and he would make sure they paid for it. They'd kidnapped Richards, tried to break him, but Raven knew what the Council had failed to realize. Richards was not just a diplomat. He was a human face of defiance, and Raven would make sure he stayed alive long enough to lead the charge. "Raven," Richard said, his voice quieter now, "why did you come for me? You could have let me die there." Raven's gaze shifted, and for a moment, there was something else in his eyes, a flicker of something buried deep. "I don't leave people behind," he said simply. His voice was colder than it had been before, and Richards understood the unspoken truth. Raven had seen too many comrades fall in wars where they weren't given the chance to fight back. Richard studied him carefully. "You're more than just a soldier, aren't you? Does it matter?" Richards considered that for a long time. "Maybe it does," he said quietly, his voice thoughtful. "Maybe it matters a lot." The rest of the journey passed in tense silence. Raven's mind was consumed with plans, contingencies, ways to turn the tide of the war that was already beginning to brew in the shadows. His tactical genius was matched only by his ruthless drive to see this mission through, and while Richards was still struggling with the brutal reality of their situation, Raven had already set his sights on what had to be done next. The transport broke through the cloud layer and into the upper atmosphere, streaking toward their destination, a hidden base on the far side of a neutral moon, where humanity's remaining forces were assembling. Raven keyed in the coordinates for their rendezvous point, his fingers moving with practiced precision. The base was small, built to be a safe haven for the few who had survived the Council's early onslaught, but it was enough for their purposes. There, they would regroup, plan, and prepare for the assault on the Council's heart. As the transport touched down, the sound of the engines winding down filled the cabin, and Raven moved with purpose to the exit. Richards hesitated, but only for a moment. He had no more doubts, no more reservations. This was war, and there was no turning back. The air on the moon was thin, but it was clean, and the harsh winds from the surrounding craggy hills whipped across the rocky terrain as Raven and Richards made their way toward the entrance of the base. The guards at the gate recognized them immediately, but there was no time for pleasantries. Raven didn't stop to speak with them, not when they had more urgent matters to attend to. Inside the base, the atmosphere was different. It was a strange mix of quiet anticipation and barely contained panic. The last few survivors of Earth's special forces were here, preparing for the next phase of the fight. Some were cleaning weapons. Others were huddled around maps. But all of them understood what was at stake. They had lost too much, and there was no way they would let humanity fall without a fight. As Raven and Richards entered the main room, the room fell silent. All eyes turned toward them, but Raven paid no mind. He moved toward the central command table, where Colonel Stephen Hayes stood, arms folded across his chest. Hayes was a man who had seen more battles than most men could handle, and his gaze softened when he saw Richards. "Good to see you still breathing, sir," Hayes said, his gravelly voice a rare sign of warmth. Richards managed a weak smile. "It's been a hell of a few days." "You look like you've seen a ghost," Hayes observed. "What happened?" Richards's expression darkened, but it was Raven who answered. "The Council made a grave mistake. They thought they could break humanity, but they'll regret underestimating us." Hayes didn't need any further explanation. He knew exactly what Raven meant. The human forces were ready to fight. But now they had a weapon the Council hadn't prepared for, a weapon in the form of the Diplomat who had come to symbolize humanity's defiance. "We'll need a plan," Hayes said, his tone turning serious. "The Council won't just let this go." Raven nodded, his eyes already on the hollow map of the galaxy that stretched across the table. "We start with their supply lines. We take the fight to them, hit them where it hurts the most. We show them that the only way to stop us is to exterminate us." Richards looked between the two men, understanding what was being proposed. It wasn't just a rescue anymore. This was a full-scale retaliation. The human forces were about to make their stand, and the galaxy would never be the same. With a single nod, Raven sealed their fate. The war had begun, and humanity wasn't going down without a fight. The countdown began in the depths of Earth's strategic command center. Raven stood at the helm of the operation, his mind focused, every muscle taut with anticipation. The galaxy's greatest empire had underestimated humanity for the last time, and the Council would soon learn that Earth's fury was far more terrifying than any alien force they had encountered. His eyes flicked over the monitors, watching as the final details were put in place. The battle was coming, and every second counted. Richard stood beside him, his features a mix of wariness and resolve. He was no longer the diplomat who had once held peace talks under the weight of 1,000 expectations. The brutal experiences of his capture and escape had transformed him into something else entirely, a symbol of human resilience. He had lived through the unthinkable, and now he stood ready to take the fight to the heart of the empire that had tried to break him. "We've made our move," Raven said, voice low but resolute. "The fleet is in position. The moment we hit their supply lines, everything changes." Richards nodded, the gravity of their plans settling over him. "And then we go for the Council itself." "Exactly," Raven confirmed. "We hit them where it hurts most. The supply lines will be the distraction. Once their attention is diverted, we'll move in on the capital." Hayes, standing off to the side, let out a deep breath. "And what if they retaliate? The Council won't just sit back and take it. They won't have a choice. Raven replied with unwavering confidence. Their forces are stretched thin, their morale is broken. We have the element of surprise on our side, and with your team, we'll hit them hard. Richards was silent, his mind racing through the implications of what was about to unfold. There was no going back. He had made peace with that fact the moment Raven had pulled him from the Council's clutches. What mattered now was the execution, the precision required to turn the tide. Humanity was fighting for its survival, and the Council was about to feel the full force of that fury. As the minutes ticked away, Raven's thoughts turned inward. This wasn't just a mission, it was a statement. The galaxy would no longer view Earth as insignificant. They would see humans as a force to be reckoned with, a force that could not be ignored or crushed underfoot. His gaze shifted to Richards once more. The diplomat had come to symbolize more than just a human struggle for survival. He was the face of Earth's retribution. Richards looked at Raven, his expression unreadable. You really believe this will work? Raven didn't hesitate. I've fought through worse odds. Richards didn't argue. He'd seen Raven in action, and he knew the man had never failed to deliver on a promise. Let's make sure the Council remembers why they shouldn't mess with humanity. The orders were given, and in the blink of an eye, Earth's fleet surged into the heart of the galaxy. The transports moved in with ruthless precision, cutting through the enemy's defenses like a blade through flesh. The Council's forces were scattered and slow to react, their leaders too distracted by their arrogance to understand the threat until it was too late. As the first wave of strikes hit, the galaxy trembled. Raven watched the displays, his face impassive as explosions lit up the enemy supply ships. They were like ants scurrying in disarray, caught off guard by the coordinated human assault. It was a beautiful chaos, a symphony of destruction that would echo across the stars for years to come. Richards's heart raced as he watched the attack unfold. He had never imagined it would come to this. The universe had always seemed so vast, so beyond human reach. But now, it was within their grasp. He turned to Raven. We're about to show them what happens when you push Earth too far. Raven's smile was brief but fierce. You're damn right we are. The assault escalated quickly. Within hours, the first reports came in. Enemy fleets were falling back, supply chains crumbling under the weight of the human offensive. Earth's fury had been unleashed, and it was a storm that no one, least of all the Council, had anticipated. We've hit them hard, Hayes reported over the comms. They're scattering, but they're still regrouping. They won't give up easily. Raven nodded grimly. Neither will we. Get ready for Phase 2. Phase 2 was a final blow. The fleet had done its job, sowing confusion and wreaking havoc across the galaxy, but the Council's leadership still stood unscathed. That was the real target. And Raven's next move was already in motion. The transport ships carrying the ground forces had already launched, and within hours, they would be on the enemy's doorstep. No more hesitation. No more second-guessing. This was the moment they had all been waiting for. As the transport carrying Raven, Richards, and their team descended toward the Council's capital, the tension in the cabin was palpable. Richards clenched his fists, his thoughts fixed on the task ahead. This wasn't just about victory. It was about making a statement, about ensuring that no one would ever question Earth's place in the galaxy again. How do you feel? Raven asked, his voice calm despite the chaos outside. Richards didn't respond immediately. His thoughts were a whirlwind. There was no time to dwell on the past, no time to wonder if they could fail. All that mattered was the mission, and the fire in his chest pushed him forward. I feel ready, he said finally. Let's end this. The capital of the Galactic Council loomed ahead, a sprawling city of steel and glass, its architecture towering above them like a monument to arrogance. It was a city that had long believed itself invincible, that had treated entire civilizations like pawns in their game of galactic dominance. But that was about to change. As the team landed, Raven gave the order, and the human forces poured out onto the streets, weapons at the ready. The aliens who had once mocked humanity's strength now cowered in fear as they realized the full scope of what was happening. Earth was no longer a mere player on the fringes of the galaxy. It was a force to be reckoned with. Richards's eyes hardened as they approached the heart of the capital. He could feel the weight of history on his shoulders. The Council had thought they could break humanity, but they were about to learn what happens when you push humans to the brink. The ground was soaked with the blood of Earth's fallen, but the fury of 1,000 suns burned in their hearts. As Raven led the charge, Richard stood at his side, ready for whatever came next. The galaxy would tremble, and humanity would make sure the Council never made the same mistake again. The battle that followed was swift, brutal, and decisive. The Council's leaders fell one by one, their empire crumbling beneath the might of Earth's fury. And when it was over, there was nothing left but the broken remains of an empire that had believed itself untouchable. In the aftermath, as the fires of victory still smoldered across the ruins, Richard stood beside Raven, looking out over the devastation. The war was won, but the message was clear. Humanity had arrived, and they would never be silenced again.